What if everything you've been told about attraction is wrong? Emotional stillness. A man who cannot control his emotions becomes predictable. A man who masters them becomes unforgettable. Emotional stillness is not about suppressing feelings, it is about not being ruled by them. When tension rises, when misunderstandings happen, when distance appears, most men react instantly. They try to fix, to argue, to demand clarity. But the man who remains grounded creates a different experience. He listens more than he speaks. He observes before he responds. He understands that not every moment requires immediate action. This calm presence makes a woman feel both safe and intrigued. She cannot easily shake him, and that stability creates respect. There was a man who noticed that a woman he cared about suddenly became distant. Her texts became dry, her tone colder. Instead of confronting her emotionally, he simply continued his life. He replied when necessary, but he did not chase. Days later, she reached out, asking why he seemed unfazed. He calmly said, "I trust that people show their intentions over time." That moment stayed in her mind, not because he ignored her, but because he didn't lose himself. Self-sufficiency. A man who builds his life around a woman will eventually lose her respect. A man who has his own direction, purpose, and fulfillment becomes magnetic. Self-sufficiency means you enjoy connection, but you don't depend on it for your identity or happiness. When a man values his time, energy, and mission, he naturally sets boundaries. He doesn't overextend himself to please. He doesn't abandon his priorities to gain attention. This makes his presence feel intentional, not desperate. A woman invited a man to see her on short notice. He genuinely liked her, but he already had plans to work on something important. Instead of canceling everything, he said, "I'd like to see you, but I'm focused on something tonight. Let's plan for another time." She was surprised. Most men would have rushed over. But this time, she waited. When they finally met, she valued the moment more. His life didn't revolve around her, and that made him stand out. Quiet confidence. Confidence that is loud often seeks validation. Confidence that is quiet is rooted in self-awareness. A man who knows himself does not need to prove himself. He speaks with intention, acts with clarity, and moves without seeking approval. Quiet confidence shows in small things: how he carries himself, how he handles silence, how he reacts under pressure. He doesn't compete for attention. He doesn't chase admiration. Yet he naturally receives it. In a group setting, there was a man who didn't try to dominate the conversation. Others were talking loudly, trying to impress. He simply listened, occasionally adding thoughtful input. A woman noticed how people leaned in when he spoke. Later, she asked him why he wasn't trying to stand out like the others. He said, "I don't need to be seen by everyone. The right people will notice." That answer stayed with her long after the night ended. Emotional independence. Many men attach their emotional state to a woman's behavior. If she's warm, they feel good. If she's distant, they feel anxious. But a man who is emotionally independent remains steady regardless of external changes. He does not allow mood swings, mixed signals, or uncertainty to control his inner state. This makes him powerful, not over others, but over himself. A woman feels this stability, and it becomes something she cannot easily forget. A woman once told a man, "You don't seem affected when I pull away." He smiled and said, "I enjoy your presence, but I don't lose myself without it." She had never heard that before. It wasn't cold, it was honest. And it made her reflect on her own behavior in ways she didn't expect. Mystery through restraint. In a world where everyone overshares, the man who knows when to hold back becomes intriguing. He doesn't reveal everything at once. He allows curiosity to build naturally. This is not about playing games. It's about understanding that depth takes time. When you reveal yourself slowly, your presence becomes something to explore, not something instantly consumed. A woman kept asking a man personal questions, trying to figure him out quickly. He answered honestly, but never in a way that gave away everything. At one point, she laughed and said, "You're hard to read." he replied. Some things are better understood over time. Weeks later, she was still trying to understand him, and that curiosity kept her engaged. Purpose over pleasure. A man who prioritizes purpose over temporary pleasure becomes rare. He is not easily distracted. He does not sacrifice long-term growth for short-term attention. This doesn't mean he avoids enjoyment, it means he has direction. And that direction shapes his decisions. A woman respects a man who is driven, not because he ignores her, but because he knows where he's going. A man had an opportunity to spend more time with a woman he liked, but it conflicted with an important goal he had set for himself. He chose his goal. Months later, when he achieved it, she saw the discipline behind his choice. She said, "Most men would have chosen me in that moment." He responded, "The right woman respects the man who chooses his path." That stayed with her. Respectful detachment. A man who can care deeply without becoming attached to outcomes is unforgettable. He gives attention, effort, and presence, but he is not controlled by the result. If something works, he appreciates it. If it doesn't, he walks away with dignity. This balance of care and detachment creates emotional clarity. A relationship didn't work out for a man and a woman. Instead of begging, arguing, or trying to force things, he simply said, "I appreciate what we had, but I respect what this is." He walked away calmly. Months later, she still thought about him, not because he stayed, but because of how he left. These are the things that create lasting impressions. Not loud gestures. Not endless pursuit. But quiet, grounded traits that are rare in a world of reaction and noise. If you understand this, your focus shifts. You stop trying to impress. You start becoming someone worth remembering. Follow me for more content like this. What most men don't realize is that being unforgettable has very little to do with effort, and everything to do with presence. The more a man tries to force attraction, the more it slips through his fingers. But when he aligns with a deeper sense of self, something shifts. His energy becomes steady, his actions become intentional, and his absence begins to carry weight. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of control. A man who doesn't rush to fill every gap in conversation creates space. And in that space, a woman begins to think, to feel, to wonder. She starts to replay moments, analyze words, and question why his presence feels different. A woman once sat across from a man during a quiet evening. There were moments where either of them spoke, yet it didn't feel awkward. She later admitted, "I don't know why, but I felt calm around you, like I didn't need to perform." He didn't try to entertain her every second. He allowed the moment to breathe. And that feeling stayed with her longer than any clever words could have. There is also strength in walking away without anger. Most people leave situations emotionally charged, trying to prove a point, trying to win, trying to be understood. But the man who leaves with composure leaves behind something heavier than words. He leaves a question that lingers. A disagreement once grew between a man and a woman. Voices didn't rise, but tension filled the air. Instead of dragging it out, he simply said, "I don't think this conversation is leading us anywhere productive right now." Then he stepped away. No insults, no frustration, no emotional explosion. Days later, she reached out, not because he convinced her, but because his restraint made her reflect. There is a quiet power in not needing to be liked by everyone. A man who stands firm in his values, even when it costs him approval, becomes memorable. Not everyone will agree with him, but those who understand him will respect him deeply. A group of friends once pressured a man to act a certain way to impress a woman. They told him to exaggerate, to show off, to play along. He refused. He stayed authentic, even if it meant being less entertaining in the moment. The woman later approached him privately and said, "You were the only one who seemed real." That authenticity separated him from the rest. There is also something unforgettable about a man who knows when to give attention, and when to pull it back. Not as a tactic, but as a reflection of his standards. He does not reward inconsistency. He does not chase confusion. He responds to clarity with presence, and to distance with space. A woman began giving mixed signals, warm one day, distant the next. Instead of chasing her through the inconsistency, the man simply matched her energy. When she was present, he was engaged. When she pulled back, he focused on his own life. Eventually, she asked, "Why didn't you fight for my attention?" He replied, "I don't fight for what should be given freely." That answer stayed with her. A man becomes unforgettable when his actions are aligned with his values, not his fears. Fear makes men overextend, overexplain, and overreact. But when those fears are removed, what remains is clarity. And clarity is powerful. There is a difference between a man who wants to be chosen and a man who chooses. One seeks validation, the other offers direction. A woman can feel that difference instantly, even if she cannot explain it logically. A woman once asked a man, "Do you even care if I stay?" He looked at her calmly and said, "I care about what we have, but I won't try to hold on to something that doesn't want to stay." She was silent for a moment. Not because she was hurt, but because she realized he wasn't driven by fear. And that made his presence heavier. In the end, what makes a man unforgettable is not perfection. It is not about always saying the right thing or doing everything flawlessly. It is about consistency in who he is. A steady energy. A clear mind. A grounded presence. Women encounter many men who try to impress them. But very few encounter a man who is simply at peace with himself. And that peace becomes something they remember long after everything else fades. When you stop trying to be unforgettable, and instead focus on becoming whole, you naturally become the kind of man that lingers in memory. There is a quiet shift that happens when a man stops seeking reactions and starts living from intention. He no longer measures his worth by how quickly someone replies, how much attention he receives, or how often he is validated. Instead, he measures it by his discipline, his growth, and the standards he refuses to lower. This shift changes everything. Because now, his actions are no longer driven by anxiety. They are guided by clarity. A man once waited hours for a reply from a woman he liked. In the past, that silence would have made him restless. He would have sent follow-up messages, checked his phone constantly, and questioned himself. But this time, he simply put his phone aside and continued with his day. When she finally replied, he responded when it was convenient for him, not out of strategy, but out of balance. She later told him, "You don't react like other men." And she meant it. There is also something deeply memorable about a man who is not afraid of losing someone. Not because he doesn't care, but because he understands that holding on to the wrong connection costs him more than letting go. When a man is willing to walk away from anything that disrupts his peace, he communicates a powerful message without saying a word. His self-respect is not negotiable. A woman once tried to test a man by withdrawing her attention, expecting him to chase her harder. Instead, he gave her space and focused on himself. Days turned into a week. When she finally reached out, she asked, "You really didn't notice I pulled away?" He replied, "I noticed. I just don't chase distance." That moment stayed with her, because she realized he wasn't playing the usual game. A man also becomes unforgettable when his kindness is controlled, not excessive. Anyone can be kind when it benefits them. But a man who chooses when and where to invest his kindness shows discernment. He is respectful, but not easily available. He is generous, but not easily used. A man once helped a woman during a difficult time in her life. He listened, supported her, and gave advice when needed. But when things stabilized and she began to treat him casually, he didn't continue giving the same level of energy. She noticed the shift and asked why. He said, "I give where it's valued." That sentence stayed with her, because it made her aware of her own actions. There is strength in being misunderstood and not rushing to correct it. Many men feel the need to explain themselves constantly, to make sure they are seen in the right light. But the man who is secure in himself understands that not everyone needs to understand him. He lets his actions speak over time. A woman once assumed a man was uninterested because he didn't constantly seek her attention. Instead of correcting her immediately, impression than any explanation could have. Another thing women don't forget is how a man handles power. Not power over others, but power over himself. His habits, his discipline, his ability to stay focused when distractions are everywhere. A man who controls his impulses becomes rare in a world where most people are controlled by them. A group of friends once encouraged a man to indulge in distractions that went against his goals. They laughed at his discipline, telling him to relax and enjoy the moment. He declined, not out of pride, but out of clarity. Later, one of them said, "You're too serious." He responded, "I'm serious about what matters." A woman nearby overheard that, and it stayed with her, not because it was dramatic, but because it was rare. There is also something unforgettable about a man who can enjoy a woman's presence without trying to possess it. He appreciates the connection, but he doesn't try to control it. He allows things to flow naturally, without forcing outcomes. This creates a sense of freedom that is both comforting and intriguing. A woman once asked a man, "What are we?" expecting him to define everything immediately. He calmly said, "We're two people who enjoy each other's presence. Let's not rush to label what hasn't fully grown yet." Instead of feeling uncertain, she felt at ease. There was no pressure, no force, just presence. And that made the connection feel different. In the end, what makes a man unforgettable is not what he does in moments of comfort, but what he does in moments of uncertainty. When things are unclear, when emotions are involved, when outcomes are unknown, that is where his true nature is revealed. And that is what stays in memory. Because anyone can be impressive when things are easy. But the man who remains grounded when things are complicated becomes impossible to forget. There is a level of control that goes beyond behavior. It reaches into how a man thinks. When his thoughts are disciplined, his actions naturally follow. He doesn't allow doubt to spiral into insecurity. He doesn't allow temporary emotions to shape permanent decisions. He understands that clarity begins in the mind, and everything else reflects it. Short story. A man once heard a rumor about a woman he was seeing. In the past, he would have reacted instantly, confronting her with emotion and assumptions. But instead, he paused. He gave it time. When he finally spoke to her, his tone was calm, his words measured. "I heard something, but I'd rather hear it from you directly." That approach changed the entire conversation. She didn't feel attacked, and he didn't lose control. What stayed with her wasn't the rumor, it was how he handled it. There is also power in a man who does not compete for attention. He understands that attention gained through performance fades quickly, but attention earned through presence lasts longer. He doesn't try to outshine others. He simply remains consistent in who he is. Short story. At a gathering, several men were trying to impress, telling loud stories, exaggerating achievements, drawing attention. One man stayed relaxed, speaking only when necessary. A woman later approached him and said, "You were the only one not trying too hard." He smiled and replied, "Trying too hard usually works against you." That quiet awareness made him stand out without effort. A man becomes unforgettable when he respects his own boundaries, even when it costs him something he wants. Desire can be strong, but discipline is stronger. When a man chooses what aligns with his values over what satisfies him in the moment, he builds a kind of self-respect that others can feel. A woman once pushed a man to compromise on something important to him. It wasn't a huge issue on the surface, but it went against his principles. He calmly declined. She tested him again, thinking he might give in over time. He didn't. Eventually, she said, "You're really not going to bend on this?" He answered, "Not on something that defines me." That moment stayed with her, because she realized his standards were real, not situational. There is something deeply memorable about a man who doesn't rush intimacy, emotionally or physically. He understands that connection built slowly tends to last longer. He doesn't try to accelerate closeness for the sake of comfort. He allows trust to form naturally. A woman once tried to move things forward quickly with a man she liked. Instead of following the pace, he slowed things down. He said, "I'd rather understand you properly than rush into something we haven't built yet." At first, she was confused. But over time, she realized that his patience made the connection feel more meaningful. She wasn't just another moment, she felt chosen. Another trait that lingers in memory is consistency. Not intensity, not bursts of attention, but steady, reliable behavior. A man who shows up the same way over time becomes someone a woman can trust. And trust is something that leaves a lasting imprint. A man didn't text constantly, didn't overwhelm with attention, but he was always consistent. He checked in when he said he would. He followed through on plans. He remained steady. One day, the woman told him, "I don't feel anxious with you." He replied, "You're not supposed to." That sense of calm stayed with her, because it was different from what she was used to. There is also strength in silence after effort. Many men give, then immediately seek recognition for what they've done. But the man who gives without needing acknowledgement creates a deeper impression. His actions speak, and he lets them stand on their own. A man once did something thoughtful for a woman, something that required time and effort. He didn't mention it afterward, didn't bring it up, didn't look for praise. Days later, she brought it up herself, saying, "You didn't even say anything about what you did." He simply replied, "I didn't need to." That stayed with her, because it felt genuine. A man also becomes unforgettable when he can accept endings without bitterness. Not everything is meant to last, and he understands that. When something ends, he doesn't try to rewrite the past or hold on to resentment. He takes the experience, learns from it, and moves forward. A relationship came to an end, and instead of arguing or blaming, the man simply said, "I'm glad we crossed paths." The woman expected more, emotion, resistance, something dramatic. But his acceptance left her thinking about him long after. Not because he fought to stay, but because he left with peace. In the end, what lingers in memory is not perfection, but energy. The way a man carries himself, the way he responds to life, the way he treats both connection and distance. These things create a lasting impression that words alone cannot. Because long after conversations fade and moments pass, what remains is how someone made you feel without trying too hard to do it. And that is what makes a man impossible to forget. There is a certain discipline in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Many men believe they must always have the right words, the perfect response, the clever line that keeps attention. But the man who understands restraint knows that not every moment needs to be filled. Sometimes, silence carries more weight than explanation. Short story. A woman once sent a long emotional message, expecting an equally long reply. Instead of reacting instantly, the man took his time. When he responded, his message was simple, clear, and grounded. "I understand what you're saying. Let's talk about it properly when we're both calm." She read it twice. It wasn't the length of his response that stayed with her, but the control behind it. There is also something unforgettable about a man who does not lose himself in admiration. He can appreciate a woman, recognize her beauty, her energy, her presence, but he does not place her above himself. He keeps his sense of self intact. Short story. A woman was used to being praised constantly. Men would compliment her endlessly, often losing themselves in the process. But one man treated her differently. He acknowledged her qualities, but he never overdid it. One day she asked, "Why don't you compliment me like the others?" He replied, "Because I see more than just what's obvious." That answer stayed with her, because it felt deeper than surface admiration. A man becomes unforgettable when he is not easily shaken by external opinions. People will judge, misunderstand, and project their own insecurities. But the man who remains centered does not let those opinions define him. Short story. A group once criticized a man for being too calm, saying he lacked excitement. Instead of defending himself, he simply smiled and continued being who he was. Later, a woman from that same group approached him and said, "I think they don't understand you." He responded, "They don't have to." That quiet confidence stayed with her. There is power in a man who chooses quality over quantity in everything: his time, his words, his connections. He does not spread himself thin trying to be everywhere or please everyone. He invests deeply where it matters. Short story. A man rarely went out to crowded social events, even though he was often invited. Instead, he chose smaller, more meaningful interactions. A woman once asked him why he avoided the noise. He said, "I prefer conversations that leave something behind." She remembered that, because it reflected a level of intention she hadn't seen before. Another thing women don't forget is how a man handles attention when he has it. Some men change when they feel desired, they become arrogant, careless, or inconsistent. But the man who remains grounded, even when he has options, becomes rare. Short story. A woman noticed that other women were also interested in a man she liked. Instead of using it to boost his ego, he remained the same, respectful, composed, and focused. She asked him, "Doesn't it affect you, all the attention you get?" He replied, "Attention doesn't change who I am." That stability stayed with her. There is also strength in a man who can admit when he is wrong without losing his sense of self. Accountability is rare, and when it is genuine, it leaves a strong impression. He does not hide behind pride or ego. He corrects himself and moves forward. Short story. A man once made a mistake in how he handled a situation with a woman. Instead of deflecting or making excuses, he said, "I could have handled that better." No long explanation, no justification. She was surprised, not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. That honesty stayed with her longer than the mistake itself. A man becomes unforgettable when his presence feels consistent, but never predictable. There is a balance. He is steady in who he is, but there is always depth to discover. He doesn't reveal everything at once, yet he doesn't hide behind games. Short story. A woman once told a man, "Every time I think I understand you, there's more to you." He smiled and said, "People are meant to be discovered, not figured out instantly." That idea stayed with her, because it made their connection feel like something that could grow over time. There is something deeply memorable about a man who does not rush to define everything. In a world where people seek quick labels and immediate clarity, he allows things to unfold naturally. He understands that real connection develops with time, not pressure. Short story. A woman once pushed for clarity early in a connection. Instead of forcing an answer, the man said, "Let's give this time to become something real before we try to name it." She expected uncertainty, but instead felt calm. That patience created a different kind of trust. In the end, what remains is not how much a man did, but how naturally he existed within himself. The less forced he is, the more impactful he becomes. The less he tries to control outcomes, the more his presence is felt. Because what women never forget is not the man who tried the hardest, but the man who didn't need to try at all to leave an impression. And that kind of presence cannot be faked. It is built, refined, and lived. Follow me for more content like this. There is a kind of strength that reveals itself only over time. It is not loud, not rushed, not desperate for recognition. It shows in how a man handles repetition, routine, and the quiet moments where no one is watching. This kind of strength builds a presence that feels real, not performed. Short story. A woman once observed a man over weeks, not just in exciting moments, but in ordinary ones. She noticed how he stayed consistent with his habits, how he treated people the same regardless of status, how he didn't change based on who was around. One day she said, "You're the same person every time I see you." He replied, "That's the only way I know how to be." That consistency stayed with her. There is also something unforgettable about a man who does not rush to fill emotional gaps with distractions. When things feel uncertain, most people look for quick relief, attention, validation, noise. But the man who can sit with uncertainty without escaping it develops a deeper understanding of himself. Short story. After a misunderstanding, there was distance between a man and a woman. Instead of immediately seeking distractions or trying to replace the connection, he spent time alone, reflecting. When they eventually spoke again, his words were clearer, calmer, and more grounded. She noticed the difference and said, You didn't run from it, he simply replied. I wanted to understand it first. That stayed with her. A man becomes unforgettable when his actions are not driven by urgency. Urgency often comes from fear, the fear of losing, missing out, or not being enough. But when a man moves with patience, it shows that he is not controlled by those fears. Short story. A woman once delayed meeting a man multiple times, expecting him to push harder or show frustration. Instead, he calmly adjusted without chasing. Eventually, she asked, "Why didn't you get annoyed?" He said, "If something is meant to happen, it won't need to be forced." That calm patience stayed with her, because it was different from what she was used to. There is power in a man who does not let temporary emotions rewrite his long-term character. Everyone experiences anger, frustration, or disappointment. But the man who remains aligned with his values even in those moments becomes someone others cannot easily forget. Short story. A heated moment once arose between a man and a woman. She expected him to react sharply, to match the intensity. Instead, he stayed composed and said, "I'd rather understand than react." That single sentence shifted the tone completely. Later, she admitted that his restraint made her rethink her own reaction. Another thing that lingers is a man's ability to create emotional safety without becoming predictable. Safety is not about being soft all the time, it is about being stable. A woman feels that she can express herself without chaos, yet still feels a sense of depth and intrigue. Short story. A woman shared something personal she rarely spoke about. She expected judgment, or an overly emotional reaction. Instead, the man listened, acknowledged her feelings, and didn't make it bigger than it needed to be. She later said, "I felt understood, not analyzed." That balance stayed with her. There is also something rare about a man who does not need constant reassurance. He does not repeatedly ask where he stands or seek validation for every action. He trusts his ability to read situations and respond accordingly. Short story. A woman once asked a man, "Don't you ever wonder how I feel about you?" He replied, "I pay attention more than I ask." She paused, realizing that he wasn't uncertain, he was observant. That quiet awareness stayed with her. A man becomes unforgettable when he is not afraid to lose interest in what no longer aligns with him. Many people hold on too long, hoping things will return to what they once were. But the man who can recognize change and adjust without resistance shows a level of maturity that stands out. Short story. A connection between a man and a woman began to fade naturally. Instead of forcing it back to what it used to be, he accepted the shift. When she asked why he seemed different, he said, "I respect what things are becoming, not just what they were." That perspective stayed with her long after they went separate ways. There is strength in a man who does not chase closure. He understands that not every situation will end with clear answers or perfect understanding. Sometimes, moving forward without full clarity is part of growth. Short story. A woman once left without giving clear reasons. Instead of chasing explanations, the man accepted it and moved on. Months later, she returned, surprised that he hadn't tried to pull her back. He simply said, "I don't chase what chooses to leave." That stayed with her, not because it was harsh, but because it was firm. In the end, what makes a man unforgettable is not a single action, but a pattern of behavior. A way of thinking, a way of responding, a way of existing that feels grounded and real. It is the man who remains centered when things are uncertain, who stays consistent when things are quiet, and who walks away with dignity when things end. That is what lingers. Because long after words fade and moments pass, what stays is the feeling of encountering someone who was fully in control of himself. And that kind of presence is not easily replaced. There is a level of awareness a man reaches when he stops reacting to every impulse and starts observing his own patterns. He begins to notice what triggers him, what distracts him, what weakens his focus, and instead of being controlled by those things, he refines himself. That refinement creates a presence that feels intentional, not accidental. Short story. A man realized that every time he felt uncertain, he would reach out for reassurance. One day, he stopped himself. Instead of acting on that impulse, he sat with it and asked himself why it existed. When he later spoke to the woman in his life, his words came from clarity, not need. She noticed the difference immediately and said, "You seem more sure of yourself." He simply nodded because he was. There is also something unforgettable about a man who doesn't try to win every situation. He understands that not every disagreement needs a victor. Sometimes, understanding is more valuable than being right. This shifts the energy of every interaction he has. Short story. During a disagreement, a woman expected the man to defend his point strongly. Instead, he listened and said, "I see where you're coming from." She paused, expecting more resistance. But there was none. Later, she admitted, "I thought you would argue." He replied, "I'd rather understand than win." That stayed with her, because it felt rare. A man becomes unforgettable when he does not attach his identity to outcomes. Whether something succeeds or fails, whether someone stays or leaves, he remains grounded in who he is. This creates a sense of stability that others can feel. Short story. A man once pursued an opportunity that didn't work out. Instead of showing frustration or disappointment outwardly, he simply adjusted his path and kept moving forward. A woman observing him asked, "Doesn't that bother you?" He said, "It's part of the process." That calm acceptance stayed with her. There is power in a man who doesn't rush to respond emotionally. He allows time to filter his reactions. What he says comes from thought, not impulse. This makes his words carry more weight. Short story. A woman sent a message late at night, expressing frustration about something small. The man read it but didn't respond immediately. The next morning, he replied calmly, addressing the issue without emotion. She later said, "I'm glad you didn't answer last night." He responded, "Not every moment needs an immediate reaction." That stayed with her. Another trait that lingers is a man's ability to stay grounded in his own reality. He doesn't get pulled into drama, assumptions, or unnecessary complications. He keeps things simple, clear, and direct. Short story. A misunderstanding once started to grow between a man and a woman because of outside opinions. Instead of feeding into it, he said, "Let's focus on what we actually know, not what we've heard." That clarity cut through the noise. She later admitted that his grounded approach changed how she saw the situation. There is also something deeply memorable about a man who doesn't fear silence after he speaks his truth. Once he has expressed himself clearly, he doesn't chase a response or try to control how it is received. He allows space for the other person to process. Short story. A man once told a woman how he felt about a situation, clearly and respectfully. After that, he didn't follow up, didn't ask for reassurance, didn't push for an answer. Days later, she came back with a deeper level of understanding. She said, "You gave me space to actually think." He simply replied, "That's all I wanted." That stayed with her. A man becomes unforgettable when he can separate emotion from action. He may feel strongly, but he chooses carefully how he acts on those feelings. This creates a sense of control that is both calming and intriguing. Short story. A woman once tried to provoke a reaction from a man, teasing him to see if he would lose composure. Instead, he smiled and said, "I see what you're doing." She laughed, but inside she was surprised. He didn't take the bait. That moment stayed with her. There is strength in a man who doesn't try to fix everything immediately. He understands that some things need time, space, and perspective. His patience allows situations to resolve more naturally. Short story. A woman was going through a difficult moment and expected the man to offer constant advice. Instead, he listened more than he spoke. After a while, she said, "You didn't try to fix it." He replied, "You didn't need fixing. You needed space to process." That stayed with her, because it made her feel understood. In the end, what makes a man unforgettable is the way he moves through life without forcing it. He doesn't rush, doesn't chase, doesn't overreact. He simply remains aligned with himself, regardless of what is happening around him. Because the rarest thing in a world full of noise is a man who is completely at ease within himself. And once that is felt, it is not easily forgotten. There is a quiet authority that comes from a man who has nothing to prove. He doesn't enter spaces trying to establish dominance or seek approval. He simply exists with a sense of certainty that doesn't need to be announced. That kind of presence is felt before it is understood. Short story. A man walked into a room where everyone was trying to be noticed. Conversations were loud, energy was scattered. He greeted a few people, found his space, and remained relaxed. A woman later said, "You didn't seem affected by any of it." He replied, "I don't need the room to feel a certain way for me to feel okay." That stayed with her, because it showed a level of independence she rarely saw. There is also something unforgettable about a man who does not over-explain himself. He speaks clearly, but he doesn't feel the need to justify every action or decision. This creates a sense of mystery, but more importantly, it shows self-trust. Short story. A woman once questioned a man's decision, expecting a long explanation. He simply said, "It felt right for me." She waited for more, but there was nothing else. Later, she realized that his certainty didn't come from convincing others, it came from understanding himself. That stayed with her. A man becomes unforgettable when he is not afraid to disappoint people in order to stay true to himself. Many men bend under pressure, trying to meet expectations that don't align with who they are. But the man who remains firm, even when it costs him approval, creates a lasting impression. Short story. A group expected a man to agree with something he didn't believe in. Instead of going along with it to keep the peace, he calmly disagreed. There was a moment of tension, but he didn't back down. Later, a woman told him, "Most people would have just agreed." He responded, "Most people aren't being honest." That stayed with her. There is power in a man who doesn't attach urgency to everything. He understands that not every message needs an instant reply. Not every situation needs immediate resolution. This patience reflects control over his time and attention. Short story. A woman once sent a message and noticed the man didn't reply right away. Hours later, he responded thoughtfully. When she asked why he took so long, he said, "I wanted to respond properly, not quickly." That stayed with her, because it showed intention rather than impulse. Another thing that lingers is a man's ability to remain grounded when emotions are high. When others are reacting, he is observing. When others are escalating, he is stabilizing. This makes his presence feel like an anchor. Short story. During a tense moment among friends, voices began to rise and opinions clashed. The man didn't raise his voice. He spoke calmly, bringing focus back to the actual issue. Afterward, a woman said, "You changed the whole energy." He replied, "Sometimes calm is louder than noise." That stayed with her. There is also something deeply memorable about a man who doesn't fear being alone. He doesn't rush into connections just to avoid solitude. He is comfortable in his own space, and because of that, his presence feels chosen, not needed. Short story. A woman once asked a man why he hadn't been in a relationship for a while. He said, "I'd rather be alone than in something that doesn't feel right." She expected loneliness in his answer, but there was none. That confidence in solitude stayed with her. A man becomes unforgettable when he values depth over surface. He is not easily impressed by appearances alone. He looks beyond what is obvious, and his attention reflects that. Short story. A woman was used to being complimented on her looks. When she met this man, he acknowledged her presence but focused more on her thoughts, her ideas, her perspective. One day she said, "You see me differently." He replied, "I see more than what's shown." That stayed with her, because it felt rare. There is strength in a man who doesn't react to every shift in energy. People change moods, situations fluctuate, emotions come and go. But he remains steady, not easily pulled in different directions. Short story. A woman once became distant for a short period, expecting the man to question it immediately. Instead, he continued being consistent without overreacting. When she returned to her normal energy, she asked, "You didn't notice I was off?" He said, "I noticed, I just didn't assume." That stayed with her, because it showed patience. In the end, what makes a man unforgettable is not intensity, but control. Not constant action, but intentional action. Not chasing, but choosing. Because when a man is fully aligned with himself, everything about him feels different. His words carry weight, his silence carries meaning, and his presence leaves an imprint that doesn't fade easily. And that is what stays long after everything else is gone. Follow me for more content like this.